Okay, so we're now recording, and we're going to go into the more formal stuff about the introduction, about the symposium now. So Ella and I just wanted to say a little bit about how we arrived at the symposium. And before we do that, we'd like to find out a bit more about how you arrived at the symposium. So with this in mind, we've set up a mini poll that Stefano is going to take you through. So he'll explain how it's going to work, just to get some more information so we know more about each other as the audience and as the speakers.
Thank you, Judith. Good morning, everyone. So as Judith just said, we are going to do we're going to ask you some questions. We make it the whole thing a little bit more interactive, and also, we get to know each other a little bit better. So I don't know if you're familiar with Mentimeter. This is exactly the same thing, which is slides. What they're asking you to do is to take your phones out or use your computers and type this URL here, slides.com mtzu2. And then the system will ask you a few questions, and we'll see shortly how the slide will populate with our own countries. So if you don't mind doing that. Mm-hmm. So. Okay. Started populating a bit. Great. Very nice. It's definitely an international event. We will save all these word clouds, and we will share them with you after the event. Thank you for the like. You can also like the slides. Okay, definitely the UK and England dominant. You have people from Spain, Turkey, Switzerland, India, also quite popular. Malta.
As we said, we haven't got the representation from South America, Canada, and America, the States at the moment.
Or sleeping.
Yeah, hopefully sleeping.
Yeah.
Wales, excellent.
Wales, yeah. Okay, we can share this with you later. Keep both in your countries if you haven't done it yet, and then we can move on to the second slides. So we have another question for you, again, in order to get to know each other a little bit better. We'd like to know in what capacity are you in here? So, if you're a practitioner, academic, PhD student, industry member, museum curator, or yeah, perfect, academic.
And if you're both an academic and a practitioner, or both a PhD and a practitioner, you can put both in, can't you?
Yeah, put both, please. Yeah, you can put more than one word anyway. Oh, it's a good mix. Practitioners are there, slightly taking over now. Yeah, good mix. Artist, great. Great. This is really important for us, obviously, to understand the audience today, and also the participants. Great. And then we can move to the final slide, which is more focused on the event itself. So what three words come to mind when you think of iDocs, crisis, and multiperspectival thinking? So we have three options. Please include three keywords here. It's very interesting. We have collaboration and complexity, right in this polyphony, right in the center. Climate emergency, inclusivity, collaboration, transformative. Very, very interesting.
This is great to see.
New possibilities, agency, different voices. These will definitely be keywords that will come up often during the day, during the event today. Lovely. So many.
COVID.
Yeah, as I said, we will share this at the end. So we'll stop sharing now, but please keep adding words if you haven't done it yet. And then back to Judith. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm gonna share a slide. Yeah. So thank you. I was fascinated to see those different ideas coming through. It's a great way to start the day. Okay. Right, let me just screen share.
So yes, while Ella's setting that up, so we thought we'd just start by Ella and I telling you a bit more about ourselves very briefly and how we came together to work on this symposium. So ages ago, Ella wrote a piece on Gaza Sederot, and I saw that and I contacted her and said, oh, this is really interesting. We've got similar interests. And then several years later, we got together and we're talking about those shared interests. And the thing is that we both come from a mix of disciplines. Ella comes from English geography, and my original discipline was geography too. And then I've moved more into anthropology and obviously media practice as well. And so this kind of shared interest in geography, in space, and in cross-cultural issues has very much shaped our combined approach to iDocs. So within this, we wanted to foreground thinking, just a little bit on why the word thinking, which is in the title of the symposium. And it's because we're in a post-truth climate where thinking is in danger of being overshadowed by feeling. And we want to make a provocation that it's important to proactively bring thinking into the frame. And we also want to say this doesn't mean that we're falling back into a Cartesian enlightenment distinction between mind and body, more that we emphasize the importance of mindful and measured responses to crises and their emotional dimensions. So by foregrounding thinking, we're not dropping feeling. So it's just sort of a provocation to bring thinking back into the frame in this post-truth time.
Yeah, exactly. And when we've been starting to talk together about how iDocs relate to thinking, we've been kind of focusing on the particular kinds of thinking that iDocs can enable. So in geography, where I'm currently based, there's been a lot of work on how creative methods can enable different kinds of thinking to take place. So for example, Harriet Hawkins has looked at how drawing as a method can increase the way, increase our sensitivity to light and shadow as a feature of place. So it kind of really hones in our thinking on a particular element of a landscape. And I'm sure as you probably all know, many scholars have also looked at how film can be used to kind of focus in on temporality. So there's a lot of different work on how different kinds of methodologies kind of really refine or focus our thinking onto different aspects of the world.
Yes. So, and then with anthropology, multimodal methods are also really important, along with cross-cultural and transcultural approaches to narrative. So these kind of shared interests makes our collaboration really fruitful. And our own work with IDOCS as a method has built on this body of work to examine the kinds of thinking that IDOCS can enable.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And this is an argument people have made across history with reference to different kinds of medium of spectatorship. And they've argued that different kinds of media create particular ways of encountering and thinking about the world. So Walter Benjamin famously examined how photography shaped perception, and he developed the term optical unconscious to account for how it opened up new aspects of vision that weren't available to the naked eye alone. And similarly, Jonathan Crary has used a different term. His term is regimes of vision, to understand the historically specific assemblages of perception that different media can formulate. And so he talks about the panorama, which is what's on the slide at the moment, as a new media in the late 18th, 19th century, so early 19th century, which allowed viewers to enter into an immersive panoramic recreation of landscapes. And his argument was that at a time of rapid change, where publics were beginning to know about other places, so kind of getting different news from abroad about different kinds of landscapes, environments, and people, but we're learning about it in a kind of disorientating, fragmented way. The panorama worked to restore a sense of coherence and to reconstruct a whole, and to place the viewer within that whole so they could experience it from their own point of view.
So yes, more recently than the panorama, there's countless arguments about how new technologies shape perception, thought, and attention. And as we know, there's many claims how media have changed how we think and encounter the world. For example, people talk about the internet and how it alters our attention spans and shifts emphasis to knowing how to access and process information rather than how to store it in our minds. Gene Youngblood comes to mind here, talking about this in his seminal book on expanded cinema. So when we're approaching this question of how we think with different media, it's really important to consider whether we're suggesting that IDOCS create a way of seeing the world, or whether they respond to and facilitate a way of seeing that's already operating, perhaps just refining it. We think the answer is probably a bit of both, which links to my thinking around metamodernism, which I've spoken about elsewhere, as a non-binary way of thinking, which allows, instead for either or, for those binaries and the narratives of conflict, allows for and approaches to knowledge, rather than and or. So then you can mix disciplines up, you can share, you can build on good practice from different areas, and IDOCS can facilitate that, we think.
Yeah, completely. So we kind of argued that while different media shape perception, they do so in ways that respond to cultural changes. So they kind of codify the ways of seeing that we need to make sense of particular zeitgeists or structures of feeling. And we've seen this, for example, in movements like surrealism that responded to the First World War to make sense of the traumas, madness and chaos people had experienced by finding a way to express it. So kind of like the hypothesis we want to explore today is that IDOCS respond to and help to make sense of a zeitgeist which is defined by crisis, precarity and uncertainty, and which is becoming ever more, and where kind of this precarity and crisis is becoming ever more embedded into the everyday realities that we live with.
So in framing today's discussions, we want to explore how IDOCS are responding to this zeitgeist. As we'll see over the day, they seem to provide tools for expressing and understanding climate crisis, political crisis, identity crises, housing crisis, refugee crisis, and so many more. So our conjecture is that it's the non-linearity and the polyvocality of IDOCS which opens up space to hold on to uncertainty, complexity, precarity, and diversity, excuse me, making them adept for thinking about crisis in this multi-perspectival way.
Mm-hmm. And we think importantly that IDOCS can also enable a kind of collective rather than individual thinking. So IDOCS can voice conflicting opinions at once, and they can be made in ways that represent large, diverse demographics without the imposition of a single authorial voice.
So we'd like to end this slide with a quote from Rebecca Solnit, who writes about hope. And she says, "Hope is an embrace of the unknown. To hope is to give yourself to the future. And that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable." So we like that quote. We very much hope that our conversations around iDocs today will facilitate this embrace of hope by foregrounding open-endedness and dialogue.
Yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment. So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about our own individual projects to kind of show where we're coming from. In my own recent work, we've been using iDocs to explore and express the COVID crisis. And as I'm sure we'll see today, there's been lots of other projects using iDocs to capture the pandemic. And I think it makes sense that iDocs are a media people are turning to think about COVID because, as we've discussed, they're very good at holding on to uncertainty. So my own project, which is called The Lockdown Game, is an iDoc that is made with a group of Londoners as part of a research project I did. So I worked with a small group, I think there was 15 Londoners who worked together, and they recorded their lives during the first lockdown in London in 2020. And they used a range of media to do this. So photos, film, writing, collage, music, much more. And they brought what they'd made to 3 Zoom workshops where we worked together to design an iDoc that would kind of capture the peculiar and specific experience of the first COVID lockdown. So I don't have time to talk today extensively about it, but the link is on the slide here and I can put it in the chat in a bit as well. So please go play with it and send me your feedback and ideas. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. But what I want to talk about briefly is how making the lockdown game kind of showed me why iDocs were a good medium for thinking about crisis. And I think the kind of key thing is that they can hold both multiplicity and connectivity in the frame. So the people in my group had had very different experiences of lockdown. Some of them were shielding the whole time because of health issues. Others were at illegal parties during that time. Some were working in hospitals, others were doing art projects. So if you look at the kind of different content they made within the web doc, you can see the kind of different experiences and different realities they were living in. So the iDoc allowed these differences to be expressed through the content that each person made. But at the workshops and coming together to design the interface of the iDoc, it also allowed the group to identify the shared cultural logics of lockdown, the kind of things that persisted across their very different experiences as a kind of common experience of that zeitgeist. So for example, they decided to design it with a very emphatic distinction between indoor and outdoor spaces, which kind of expressed the new weight of this distinction in collective consciousness. And they also decided to express how the familiar everyday spaces of homes and local areas became surreal in the time of lockdown. And this is expressed through the design of the spaces in the iDoc. So the one on the slide, for example, you can see the different spaces within it. So here, a living room, a collage from the group members' various pieces of content to make a kind of shared version of a private domestic space. And another manifestation of this surrealism was how the group decided to express absurdity in relation to lockdown rules. So within the iDoc, they included pop-up windows that asked you to do stupid things like bulk by loo roll or inject bleach, which Donald Trump famously thought would kill the virus, as well as doing sensible things like wash your hands. And as well as these pop-up windows, the iDoc includes a well-being meter, which is the rainbow you can see in the corner there, and a viral risk meter, which is the other corner. It's like a kind of Nando's spice meter. And the meters change depending on the content you engage with. So if you go to if you watch a video of a party, your well-being will go up, but so your viral risk. So they're very difficult to balance, these 2 meters. And this reflects a kind of shared sense amongst the group that lockdown was like an unwinnable game and it would be funny if the stakes weren't so high. So the way the group planned these features together at the Zoom workshops showed me how iDocs can enable collective thinking. And philosophers have argued that the different kinds of tech are parts of our minds, and they call this the extended mind theory. So the argument is that things like phones, Google, notepads are part of the assemblage of how we think, so not just kind of additional to, but kind of actually like integral to our thought processes. And I think if we contemplate iDocs as being part of an extended mind, the extension they offer is a way to think collectively. And this is true at least in the case of participatory projects like the one I was running. So at the workshops, designing the iDoc was a process of thinking together to identify what was shared across very different experiences. And I think importantly, iDocs can enable this thinking together without conflating views. So designing the iDoc interface was a way of finding what was common, but the iDoc can still hold on to what's different, because different bits of the iDoc space can include different content and different features. So they're a really brilliant way of hanging together shared and divergent experiences.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ella. So yeah, I mean, there's so much in that that relates to what I do and what drives me as well. And I just noticed, feel free to put, when we talk about things, members of the audience, please use the chat. And I noticed Mike just did that. That's really encouraged, to add in links for other people to follow up. And we will share the chat afterwards. We're recording that as well, so we can circulate that. So yeah, moving on beyond the pandemic to iDocs and ongoing uncertainty. One of the issues which is impacting heavily on the iDocs field is that the authoring tools for screen-based work, which engage with the multiple windows and the data assemblage aspects of iDocs, and which crucially can hold both similarity and difference within the same frame, that's important, have not been very robust. We've had HyperCard, we've had Director, Flash, Clint, for example, all of which are no longer being supported commercially. Given my belief in the values of tools such as these for creating multimodal assemblages, which can be as closed or as open-ended as the author or authors choose, and which can enable us to explore topics from a multiplicity of perspectives in our own time and at our own pace, I decided, together with my colleague in Leeds, Stefano Odorico, who you've already met this morning, to set up a project through which we could keep exploring these tools and, crucially, help to promote their ongoing development. This project is called Polyphonic Documentary, and the link to that is just polyphonicdocumentary.com. I think Florian's going to put that in the chat. And if you go to that site, you'll see from our posts that we're currently working with two authoring tools, Korsakoff and Stornoway.io. The developers of these two tools are active members of our research group, which is very handy, but there's no reason why in the future we shouldn't expand that to include other tools as well. So we launched this project in October 2020 through an open invitation to members of the iDocs community, asking if they'd like to take part in a collaborative, co-creative project. So we're learning together and we're developing our skill set together is the idea. So we started off with a series of online meetings where we did some collective reading around the theoretical foundations of multiperspectival thinking and polyphony, which links to Bakhteen's work on the polyphonic novel. We then put out a project call in which we asked participants to film 3 to 5 short videos of a maximum of 3 minutes each over the course of one day that reflected their interest in polyphony. We've ended up with around 25 active participants from all around the world. And our call for video contributions was made last June, and many of the clips received reflect a lockdown aesthetic, a close attention to detail in relation to the everyday realities of sheltering in place. So these are observational clips that can't easily be inserted into an edited film, but which work very well when put into relation with each other through an iDocs style interface, as shown in this image. So that's the interface for the Korsakoff piece. This relationality is key. You'll see from our website that we've already made a Korsakoff project with these clips and that we're now working on a Stornoway version. We're getting deep into the different properties of the two software programs, which is bringing up all sorts of issues in relation to temporality, degrees of randomness, personal exploration versus designing for an audience, and so much more. What's become really clear is that these tools can help us to think in ways that challenge linearity, challenge the plot-driven structures of conventional narrative film, and create new juxtapositions which foreground contingency and uncertainty. This seems to map very well onto the skills or literacies that I believe will be increasingly needed as we go forwards. At the most basic level, helping us to better engage with complex, precarious situations, where, as we said in the call for this symposium, diverse perspectives cannot be authentically conflated into one narrative, and ways of moving forward are multiple. That's all I have time to say for now, but it's an ongoing project. And the idea is that members of that group can remix the clips, and that we'll have several iterations doing small projects in a playful way and sharing the different ways that different members of the group have worked together collaboratively and co-creatively to explore these issues. So if you're interested in following us, or indeed becoming involved in making some work with us as we go forwards, just go to the link in the chat where you'll find out how to get in touch with us. So that's it. It is 10 o'clock, but maybe we'll take a couple of minutes break before going into our first session.